Great. Hi, everybody. Today we have Danny from Hype joining us. We're going to be going over token launch dynamics and mechanics. I know that's something a lot of you have had questions about. Hopefully, this could be enlightening. Danny's definitely got a wealth of knowledge in this area. I've spoken to him before about it, so you're in the right place if you got questions about that. That being said, Danny, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, I'll hand it over to you.
Appreciate it. Yeah, thanks, Austin. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, maybe just get the deck up because I've got a slide on myself in the first deck, which is always the easiest way to present myself. So hopefully you can see that. Thanks for having me today. Yeah, so today we're going to talk about how to launch a token, what that even means, and all the complexities that go with it. I wish there was a really easy, obvious one-slide answer for this, but there isn't. So over the last few years, I've been involved in a huge amount of token launches. So just thought we'd share some more information. I'm the CEO at Hype. We are a crypto super agency. We have been running for 8 years, and we run go-to-markets, branding, all sorts of different marketing for projects, and predominantly help them with their token launches. So a bit about me, just so you know, I was an entrepreneur when I was 18 from the UK. I've been in marketing growth for way longer than I like to admit. Crypto since 2017. At this point, I tried to work this out the other day, and I'd lost count, but certainly over 150 crypto projects that I've worked with, and definitely over 20 TGEs that I could remember. It's probably been more. I've spent 4 years at Hype, and in my spare time, I like to lose money trading. So that's me. Today, I wanted to talk about a few different areas. So the first thing is the evolution of token launches, because sometimes we forget just how much has been tried and how much has failed or worked or not worked or what we've learned. And so I always think it's good context to go back and just look at how the token launch market has sort of changed. So we'll touch on that. We'll touch a bit on, do we even need a token? What does that even mean? And then if you do, we'll talk about what preparing for a token generation event looks like. So we've got kind of like a 3-phased approach that we tend to consider, and I'll talk through that. And then finally, so what I did ahead of this call and this session, so Hype, we're over 100 people globally of marketers and crypto native people that have been involved in hundreds of launches and products over the years. So I put a question out to the team to use the HiveMind to get people's top tips. What would you recommend to people that are going to go through a token launch that they should know? And so I've just listed those out at the end as well. I thought it'd be quite interesting to run through some of them. Some of them are good. Some of them are quite interesting. So that's the plan for today. Should be about 20 minutes to half an hour, probably. There will be time at the end, I think, for questions. I can't see you guys, so maybe we'll wait afterwards and then just note your questions down and we can run through them. So where do we start? We're going to start with the playbook that everyone needs to follow to make sure you have a successful token launch, which of course does not exist. I wish it did. It would make our life a lot easier. But the reality is that every token launch is different, right? It's different chains, it's different stages of the cycle, it's different situations of the project, it's different use cases of the token. So many different factors go into token launches that there just is no playbook. There is no like, you should absolutely 100% do these things. What there are, though, is ways that you can get prepared and things to consider and know that are going to be really important. So that's what we're going to talk about today. If we had a playbook, I would certainly share it with you. So what is a token launch? Sometimes we forget to talk about this a bit, but a token launch is not a payday. It's not the end of the journey. You'd be amazed, or maybe not, how many times a project comes to us and all they're thinking is TGE. And that's the end. No, there's been no thought about even what happens the day after TGE, let alone the weeks or months afterwards. And your token launch is your IPO moment. Right? It's the moment actually you get shareholders, you get public people interested in you, the world is looking, and you need to start shipping and delivering. And so anyone that thinks token launch is the end, it's actually not, it's the beginning. And so often you need to be thinking like that when you're thinking about a token launch, even early on. It's definitely the most unique aspect of crypto marketing. There's a lot of people that would say, there's elements of marketing that apply regardless whether it's Web 2, Web 3, whatever. But token launch and token marketing is very unique. And it's definitely the most stressful thing you'll probably do. It's more stressful than moving house. I know that. And I've heard it's more stressful than getting divorced, but I don't know that. And it's an intense coordination event. So if you ever come across like a good token launch, you're like, oh, they did a really good job. I can guarantee you they just spent the last 3 months losing all their hair because of the intensity of the coordination that needs to go into actually having a successful launch. And there have been a lot of launches that have not gone well or have been made mistakes or gone badly. And it's because it's an incredibly intense time and it needs a lot of coordination. And we're going to talk about what I mean by that. So I mentioned historic context. The historic context is important. And to be honest, I could probably add a 7 and an 8 here now, but I'd done this earlier in the year. But if you think about the evolution of token launches and where they've come from, back in 2017, it was all ICOs and then regulation caused a problem. And so things moved over to launch pads and IEOs, and then that became the meta. And then all of a sudden it turns into IDOs, like initial DEX offerings, and there was LBP pools, and then everyone was getting sniped and botted. So they went, okay, well, that doesn't work. Let's move on to airdrops and fair launches. And I'm sure everyone remembers things like the big Celestia launch or Jito and Solana kicking off the airdrop season back in probably 23, I think it was. And then that became the meta and everyone was doing, points programs and airdrops. And then when that stopped working, everyone started moving back to direct exchange listings and go, okay, well, now we need the Bybits and the Binances of the world. But the problem with that was everything was high FTV, low float. VCs had already got in early and every single chart just went down only because actually there was no value. You couldn't justify the valuation that were being launched at because they were being launched at crazy numbers because the exchanges were selling them. And so then we started to see the evolution of like public raises and NFT sales and that kind of stuff. And we saw Echo and Legion come along about a year or so ago. And that's been really interesting. And I think the most fascinating point now is that if we've almost gone right back to the beginning. And if you look now, like with Kaito, even with Legion now, and with some of these other launch pads, actually now that 2017, the sort of 1 and 2 meta has come back. And actually we've had some really successful ICOs. If you saw the Plasma token launch, we've seen lots of good public raises. So the point here is that token launches are constantly evolving and changing. People are constantly looking for ways to do this. There's a bunch of other more unique Dutch auctions, all sorts of things that have been tried as well that aren't necessarily in this list. But historic context is important. And if you're going to launch a token, it is worth looking back at what has and hasn't been successful and what methods have been used. Because for you, one of these might be suitable and one of them might not. Or there might be examples out there where things, or a good idea you have, and actually there's examples why that didn't work. ICOs seem to be the new meta again. We'll see how that continues to develop. Obviously, the regulatory situation has turned in our favor a bit for crypto. So that's why they're back. But it's always this look for like fair, like how do you let community in? And I think that's quite interesting. So once you've kind of understood the context, the most important question that no one is asking, but they should, is do you actually need a token? Well, it seems silly, but actually, really justifiably, do you need a token? And if you think about the type of projects who have had incredible product market fit, and not had a token, actually, there is a case to say, well, maybe if you look at Hyperliquid, it was live for 18 months, lots of users, lots of volume, had a very successful token launch. Pump Fun was the biggest revenue-driving business in crypto for a year before their token existed. Friendtech was the largest social fi app for about 6 months, had no token. There are opportunities to not need a token. And the thing to think about is, don't launch a token until you know exactly what behavior you are trying to incentivize, and then why that behavior is actually going to matter to your protocol's long-term success. Because if you think about it, just launching a token for the sake of it, because, well, I'm a crypto project, I need a token, I don't know, governance. If you can't even justify and explain why it's needed and why it matters and how it's going to help your project and your protocol, how can you expect community members to want to come and share in that journey with you and buy it and invest in it. So I don't think enough people think about this question first, but wherever you are, whatever stage, pre-seed, seed, even beyond and ready to launch, if you haven't asked yourself, do we need a token right now? You should. But let's assume the answer is yes, because a lot of the time it is, and that's fine. There's lots of reasons why you do need a token, and it is crypto after all. I'm not anti-tokens at all. In fact, I'm the opposite. But assuming you have decided, yes, we need a token, there is a reason, there's value to it, then we need to think about preparing for the token launch event. And actually, TGE is a bit misleading because the token generation event can happen before the token is publicly available to trade. But when we refer to TGE, we normally mean publicly tradable, launched on the market, available for people to buy. So we have a three-phased approach. I say we, it's kind of just over the years, it's what we've ended up building and doing. And I've kind of broken this down into all the things that you need to consider at each of these phases to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success. As I said, there isn't a playbook which is like, definitely do these things and it will work, but there are definitely elements that you need to be mindful of. So phase one, the pre-launch, the FOMO and excitement stage. There's a bunch more I could have put on here, but this might be 3 months before the launch, 5 months before the launch, month before the launch. We tend to get involved with projects at least 2 or 3 months before they're ready to go to market, because there's a lot of stuff that has to happen. So you need to be defining your positioning, narrative, branding, differentiator, reason why you exist. People have to understand that. You have to have built your first early supporters and your community of builders and users and fostered some kind of community element. You definitely have to have prepared all key partnerships, BD, budgets, the cost of everything. It's very, very expensive to actually TGE often. And so all of these things have to be prepared well in advance. You need to think about market makers. You need to prepare plans for liquidity at launch. We often recommend using a broker to find market makers so that you can get good deals, because you can get screwed. And you need to make sure that your product, your marketing team, everything is aligned, that you're not just going to have constant delays, which is very typical in crypto. I think probably once ever in my experience has a TGE gone out on the day it said it would go out at first. They're almost always delayed. And then, of course, you want to be launching marketing campaigns. You want mindshare, you want attention. You need to create some kind of FOMO and excitement that your thing is coming, because otherwise no one's going to really get involved. And so that means building PR relationships, announcing raises. Definitely things like founder branding are really, really valuable at this stage, because if you can build a founder's voice, then it's not just a faceless brand that you're trying to sell to people. It's actually a real person, right? It's a real team. It's real belief that people buy into, and that emotional connection actually makes a huge difference when it comes to launching a token. So loads more things, but pre-launch is all about, how do I build excitement? How do I grow FOMO? How do I make sure baseline everything is where it needs to be? And if you haven't done any of these things, you're not ready to launch. Like, all of these things have to be considered beforehand. Assuming we've done that, you then have, I guess, what we call the launch window, which is phase two. And the launch window might be within a few weeks of the launch. It doesn't necessarily just have to be on the launch day, but this is where things really ramp up, and it really matters. So this is where you want to be announcing tokenomics or token mechanics or any staking plans or post-launch things that people can get excited about. You need to be thinking about listings or launchpad announcements, or however you're going to launch, because again, there's all the co-marketing and stuff that comes around with that. Light papers, white papers, any other things that you might want to launch, tokenomics and whatever, for people to really get under the skin and know if they want to invest in this thing. This is where KOLs, partner amplification, thinking about your network, how can I get as many people to talk about me as possible during this period, is really, really important. Legal setup for team token unlocks is really key here. So it's a bit of a unique one, but actually something that we see a lot, which is that you are going to have a team who are also, like, your TGE is not just for the public, it's also for you as a company and all of your team. So there's a bunch of stuff to consider with your team that make sure there are, legal setups for team token unlocks in advance, or for partners or whoever. And we'll talk a bit about that in a bit more detail later. You obviously want to coordinate your launch announcement through your network. So you want to be getting everyone and their dog and your friends, family, whoever. They need to know the date. You want to tell them in advance. You want to get as many people, particularly to boost the algorithm on socials or whatever it is, to get as much attention with whatever you're going to launch. And And if applicable, things like airdrop claims or unique experiences that you want to deliver, this is the time to do that, because mindshare at this point is what matters up to launch. And then phase 3 is post-launch. Again, the bit that a lot of people ignore or forget about, but is actually just as important. And this is about maintaining momentum. What we see happens really, really regularly is everyone puts loads of effort into the lead up and gets tons of attention, mindshare. Anyone that's been in the market over the last 6 months will have seen loads of these. So I had loads of projects with Kaito, with whatever, all this attention, excitement, everyone's very excited. And then they launch and then they just disappear. No one cares anymore, on to the next one. And that's because they've not thought about how to maintain that momentum post-launch. That often comes from shipping. So we often talk to projects about, well, look, rather than launching everything at once, why not hold 1 or 2 things back so that a few days later you've got another thing to get excited about, and then a few days later another thing. We talk about these marketing peaks that you can create. That's a good way of doing that, so that there's already a plan for the following few weeks to keep people engaged. Don't stop marketing. I would say that, obviously I'm biased, but genuinely the amount of people we see are like, yeah, so we're just going to use you guys up until TGE and then like we're good. So, okay, well, what are you doing after the TGE? Oh, well, we'll figure that out. Depends on how it goes. And of course, if you're not making noise, if you're not out there, if you're not marketing, then you disappear very quickly. Unfortunately, there's a lot of noise in the market. So don't stop marketing. You should already have thought, as I said before, what is our momentum campaign going on beyond the launch? You want to over communicate for sure. So you want to share successes, milestones, token holders want to hear from the team. You also really want to be addressing FUD proactively, particularly founders. I know it's hard sometimes and you might not want to, but some of the best successes I've seen is when a token launch maybe didn't quite go right, but the founders came right out and addressed it, handled it, maybe changed things or whatever it was, and then sort of turned it all around. So it's not all over if it goes wrong. You do have an opportunity, a small window, but you really have to take that and be fully transparent and open and be prepared to take some of that fun. And even if you have the most perfect plan and the most perfect launch, someone somewhere is going to give you some shit. That's just how it is. It's just what happens, and that's okay. They will also stop at some point, as long as you're doing things for the right reasons. Another thing that's actually really good to consider is OTC transparency. A lot of people think OTC stuff is very under the table, very like backhanded, or don't talk about it publicly. The reality is your token is going to launch, and the first thing that's going to happen is people in your team are going to think, oh, wait, I'm locked for like 3 or 4 years. Oh, there's this random miscellaneous group I can just fire sell my tokens to. Let me go and do that. Actually having transparency about OTC and what's possible and maybe being organized with that, and sort of that goes with what I said about before about having the legal structure. It's okay to talk about it. It's okay for people to sell some tokens if it's done in a managed way. But what you don't want is all of that stuff happening in the background. Maybe token gets dumped. Maybe there's some rumors. Maybe something gets leaked. And before you know it, everyone's talking about the team are dumping and you don't even know what's going on anymore. So you do want to make sure you're getting on top of that. And finally, you now want to turn your attention properly. I mean, hopefully you have already, but your users and your products now matter more than the token. So again, that's the mistake a lot of people make, is that they launch a token and then that's the only thing in their mind, or the token price. The token price is sort of a vehicle for everything else that you're doing. And so you can't influence the token price. I mean, unless you hold all the supply, which you shouldn't, you can't influence it. So don't lose sleep over it. Instead, make sure you're shipping, make sure you're building, make sure you're delivering value and revenue and all the other things that go with running a successful business, and the token will take care of itself most of the time. It also is heavily market driven. So you can be doing all the right things, and if the market is doing what it's doing, then the token will just follow. So also things to consider. So there's a bunch there, and I've been talking very quickly. And I have these slides to share afterwards, I'm sure as well. But yeah, there's a lot, as you can see, there's a lot that goes into thinking about what you should be doing pre, post, during, and after a token launch. That is more than just, I don't know, what are the tokenomics, or let's do a video for launch. All these things have to be going on behind the scenes. So finally, top tips. As I said, I asked for the hive mind of Hype. We have 100+ staff there who've all been involved in launches. What are your top tips for projects that haven't launched before? what would you tell them? And yeah, from real world examples. So apologies, this is a bit of a text heavy slide, but I basically just listed them all here. I'll go through them and explain some of the context. So the first one, don't leave the community hanging on for ages. I'm not surprised by that. We have a lot of community management and social managers in our team, and I'm sure they're very frustrated when all they hear is when token. So yeah, that is definitely something to consider. I think the second point is really valuable. You don't have to do an airdrop. In fact, not doing one can be positive EV, positive expected value, because there was a bit of a time where it was like, well, if you don't do an airdrop, no one's going to care. Actually, there's some really interesting study, and there's a link here in the deck as well to a study that was done and looked at, I think, all the airdrop and token launches over the last like 3 or 4 years, and nearly 9 out of 10 tokens that had an airdrop declined, and those that didn't. So there is an interesting lesson in there. Part of that is how you do the airdrop, but don't feel like you have to always do one, because you might not. Number 3, the more people that have a cost basis of more than 0, the better. So I force holders to have skin in the game. I think somebody like Succinct did this really, really well. Even from day one, launching their testnet campaign, you actually had to pay to take part. And I think that's a really, really interesting mechanic, because straight away, as we all know, if something's free, we value it slightly less than if we even had to pay $1 for it or something small. So consider how you can force people to have skin in the game early, and they will stay with you. Never compromise on vesting. Someone's put here 1+3 for everyone meaningful. I mean, there's lots of different ways you can handle this, but it's true. You want to make sure that you're thinking about all the partners, all the people involved. How do you make sure that you're not setting yourself up for failure, or potentially your community up for failure, and giving some parties the opportunity to basically dump on everyone else? So any kind of meaningful contribution, which is normally more than a few bits of supply, you definitely want to be having strong vesting for them. You want to align yourself with a high FDV category. This is really interesting, and something we do a lot actually with projects, because I don't know, let's say you're a infrastructure provider, and I don't know, Oracle, right? And you might look at all the other Oracle tokens on the market and go, well, they're kind of capped, maybe 100, 200 million market cap. Cool. If you're going to sort of position yourself in that category, then don't expect to be valued at $1 billion. If you take an L1 or an L2 or I don't know, something else, then it might be different. So how you position yourself is really, really important. And if you can align yourself with high FDV categories, that often helps with associated value when you're launching a token as well, both from the exchanges and also from retail. Timing is everything. Rush launches fail every time, but so does trying to time the market. I think this couldn't be more true. The amount of projects, I actually know projects who back in 2021 didn't launch because they were trying to time the market. Obviously 22 came around, we had the Terra thing, had FTX, had the crash, then we had a couple of year bear market. They still didn't ever launch because they were like, oh, we missed it. This year has now come around. They've still not launched because they're still waiting for the perfect moment. And they've basically had 4.5 years almost of being out of the market because they're trying to time it. And the reality is you just don't know what Trump's going to say tomorrow or what the market's going to do. You just need to prepare as best you can. Try not to rush it. Obviously, when the market is up and booming and doing well, typically launches do better. So there is some timing, but to get the perfect time is almost impossible. And you need a bit of luck on your side for that as well. Just if the week that you launch, things aren't going as well and doesn't do as well, that doesn't mean the token's dead. Right? It's got lots and lots of opportunity to recover. Have a plan B and have a plan C, because nothing ever happens on time in crypto. I might get a t-shirt with that on, because it is the most true thing I think I've ever heard. As I said, maybe once ever, I think a TG has happened on time when we've been told the date. So don't beat yourself up. Don't be mad. Make contingency plans, as we always do as well, and assume it won't happen, but be ready if it does. CoinMarketCap, CoinGecko, DeFi Llama, all of these aggregators, marketplaces, you have to actually apply early, and in some cases you have to pay. And again, people forget this. And then your token goes live, and everyone wants to go and have a look at how it's doing and buy it or find a contract address or whatever, and it's not available anywhere. And then you're like frantically pinging the CoinGecko team, and they're like, yeah, we'll get to this in a week. So right, you need to be preparing all of that stuff in advance. I mentioned the airdrop thing. There's a link there to an interesting study, which is worth a read, about how to and not to do an airdrop. And then finally, I think this is probably my favorite. Number go up is the best marketing. I think ETH is showing us the way very much so this month as well. You can do the greatest marketing campaigns in the world, but there is nothing better than number go up because everyone is happy. And actually, if you look at some of the most successful token launches in history, most of the time, and some of the biggest communities, I would say. So if you think about like the Link Marines or, some really well-known projects that have had very successful communities around their token, it's because they made their early community very rich. The number went up, the token did well, and it's very hard to compete with that because that is the best marketing you can do. So that's the top tips from the team at Hype. One last thing, someone sent me this, which I thought was actually a good top tip as well. Kind of what I was saying, but don't make curve it. Don't wait for the perfect time and for the perfect product. Ship fast, iterate. That's how we win in crypto. That's what the best people do. And so don't be those guys who missed 4 years because you were trying to time the market. I'll leave you with 3 thoughts, which we always ask all of our clients we work with, which I think often people don't even think about, but is worth considering. If you had to describe one behavior your token should incentivize, what would it be? If you can't answer that, then you need to have a think about what the purpose of your token is and why someone would consider buying it. Second one is what will make your token more valuable in 5 years' time? I think is also really, really worth thinking about. Longevity and vision of the business sort of helps that. And then the final one is who shouldn't get your token? Again, if you're going to do an airdrop or whatever, who are the people that you don't necessarily want involved or don't care about or aren't going to add any value to your business? They are just as important to consider as the opposite, because if the token goes into the wrong hands, then that's when you can get into problems. So there was a lot of talking. I apologize. Just wanted to whiz through and make sure I got that cleared in about 20 minutes. But yeah, that's kind of a very, very quick run through how we think about tokens, things to consider, different ways to play it. And yeah, happy to take any questions, chat about any launches or things that you guys might have coming up. And you can follow me on Twitter. That's my handle. Or I'm happy to share my Telegram afterwards as well if anyone wants to ping me.
Thank you so much, Danny. We do have a couple of questions over here on the side, so we'll probably go ahead and jump in here.
Sure.
Let's start out here. Do you think points and leaderboards still work?
Do I think points and leaderboards still work? Yes, to an extent. It depends on the project and it depends on the category. So I would say there was a time like a year ago when every single person was doing points and leaderboards, and it's definitely got tired and people definitely got tired of being farmed. But I have seen some really innovative, smart campaigns that involve points and leaderboards, but they're not just points and leaderboards for the sake of it. It's not like, hey, give us your money, we'll give you some points and maybe you'll get an airdrop. I think the days of that are a bit dead. But that's not to say that points and leaderboards can't still be useful. You just need to be a little bit more creative. And there's some interesting ones out there at the moment that I think are doing a pretty good job of.
Would you be able to share those? That would actually be interesting for people to kind of look at as a case study.
Yeah, I can do. I think let me fish out a few. If you want, I can add them to the end of the deck and then we can circulate the deck afterwards because I can't think of loads off the top of my head, but okay. I know there's been a bunch of the last few months that I've been involved in that I thought were pretty good. I just can't think of any of them right now.
Perfect. Then we have another one here. What is a healthy amount to allocate towards a marketing budget?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, it's all relative, right? It does depend. Honestly, I know projects that spend millions on token launches because it is such a critical thing. And if you're launching a multi-billion-dollar business, valuation business, then that is actually probably what you want to be spending. How much of that goes on marketing specifically is a bit tricky to say because depends how you define marketing. Right? Marketing is everything from like the work we do, which is all the community, social content, campaigns, but then there's also partnership stuff. And, people are spending 6 figures on running a Kaito campaign. That was working for a bit, maybe not working as well so much now. So these things move a little bit. There's also, you can argue an airdrop is a marketing cost. You might be dropping 2% of your supply, which might be millions in cost. as a marketing cost because the airdrop is a marketing mechanic. So honestly, I don't have an answer. I know that's really lame and it's a bit on the fence. I don't really have an answer for what a healthy amount is. Like, hey, you should spend X amount of money. But there is definitely a lot of money that gets spent on marketing. And ultimately, particularly in crypto, it's about making noise. Unfortunately, it is about making noise early on. And there is a lot of noise out there. So, there's a classic marketing framework, which is to do with share of market, share of voice, it's called. And it shows that, and this is like in the world, not just in crypto, but those who spend more on marketing get more attention, just how it is, right? The more share of voice you have, the more share of market you have. And share of voice is measured by how much money you spend on advertising. So I would argue that applies regardless of crypto or not, unfortunately.
I think something I might ask, like rolling off the back of that, I think for a lot of early projects, maybe they're looking at a valuation of, let's say, like 3 to 6, like somewhere under 10 million, right? So they're probably raising, you get your 500K, you get your million, 2 million, something like that. And you sit down and you're like, okay, we need to like roughly ballpark out where maybe some of this money goes, just to start thinking. Of course, like in reality, it's like getting a plumber out, right? You think they're going to unclog the toilet. Next thing you know, your whole yard's dug up and a $500 job became a $9,000 job. Something like that, right? It's kind of how sometimes marketing goes. But for maybe somebody who is looking at that like first investment round, something like that, do you have maybe roughly a ballpark they should keep in mind? And of course, this varies too by like project, right? If it's like a very
I think I hate being on the fence. Actually, I hate people that do this and be like, well, it could be this or it could be that. But it really depends on, for example, if you need a ton of engineering resource because you're building something really complex or you've got a ton of building to do before you go live, then of course you want to direct a lot of your funding to that. Whereas, if you've got a fairly simple business model or a simple product or, just it's a great idea, but it's really, and actually all your budget can be marketing. I mean, there's no reason why not. It's I guess it's about runway ultimately is the question here. And what I would say that might be helpful, because we get asked this a lot as well, is like, when is the right time to bring in an agency? And that's I think an interesting question to ask, because I would say if you've just raised $500,000 and you're still at like pre-seed seed, you're probably too early for an agency, honestly, because you're probably a small team of a few and you would be better off spending that money on one really good solid hire. Maybe it's like a community manager lead or like a social content person who can kind of do a bit of enough to get you to a level where you're then ready to go. Typically where we would come in or a decent agency would come in is, as I said, it's normally seed to series A-ish. Maybe you're probably ready to launch. You've probably got a product or you're about to have your product live, or mainnet's coming or a token is coming. So that's when you really want to double down. And what an agency will do is it will like hypercharge and hypergrowth your efforts. But even with an agency, you still need to be doing stuff. It's still a collaborative work. So I guess in that sense, if you're thinking about budgets at this early stage, I wouldn't probably be spending it on agency resource. I would be sending it on internal resource and staff who can do a lot of these things that you need. And then, if you don't need to spend a huge amount on development or engineering or whatever, then I would be putting that into growing your marketing for sure, or going to events or getting the founder out there more, whatever it might be. Maybe bringing on early ambassadors. I know a few projects who had really, really successful launches because 18 months before they were even ready to launch, they were already thinking, okay, we want sort of some big KOLs or ambassadors to be part of this project. So let's bring them in early at the seed or pre-seed stage. So they're brought in really early and they're going to become our distribution arm when we're ready. And I think that's also a really interesting tactic, which isn't necessarily as expensive as it would be a year later when you're then trying to get them to, buy into a later round, or you've got to pay them in stables and they're going to be very expensive. So that's also something to consider.
Yeah, that's great insight there. Especially this idea of like, maybe just hire a person. And I feel like that can also help maybe sometimes like an early team wrap their head around what should be allocated.
Yeah, and in terms of hiring a person, we acquired a recruitment agency a few years ago, and we have Hype Talent, which is a recruitment arm, because actually we realized there was so much requirement for bringing in good talent early on. And we spoke to a load of projects that just weren't ready for us because there was no one that could manage us or work with us. It was just too early in their journey to need an agency to go and do some crazy campaigns and stuff. So actually going and hiring and bringing people in made a lot of sense at that point. And then you've also now got a more established team who can handle an agency and all the stuff that comes with that. And maybe you need a PR one and a marketing one and a this and that. You don't want to be the founder handling all of that because you've got way more important things to be worrying about.
Yeah. And then looks like we have one more here. And this, I don't know the exact context to it, but this is clearly directly in response to something you were saying. But what about Hyperliquid style token launch through community and airdrop?
Yeah, the funny so after Hyperliquid launched, I remember really vividly there was a bunch of projects that came to us and said, "Oh, we want to do a Hyperliquid style launch." And we were like, "Okay, what product have you got?" "Oh, well, the product's not live yet." "Right, okay. Have you got any kind of community?" No. But we're just going to give away 30% of our supply. It's like, okay, that's not actually what Hyperliquid did. Sure. So Hyperliquid did an incredible airdrop. Everyone knows they gave away a crazy amount. The story with Hyperliquid is, one, there were zero investors and VCs because they were bootstrapped themselves because they'd made money in other ways. That's hard to replicate. Sure, if you're a multimillionaire, great. Definitely go and do that model. That's great. The other thing is they had a product that had reached product market fit for about 18 months. But they had a huge amount of volume, tons of traders, really loyal user base, all of those things, and then went and did a really generous airdrop. Hyperliquid is really hard to replicate. And the reason everyone else is not quite got there is because that's a bunch of things that have to happen over a long period of time to get that kind of level of success. So I think, some people looked at Hyperliquid and the answer must be, let me give away 30% of supply and just do a massive airdrop. A few people did that and wondered why it all got dumped and then their tokens in the bin. Well, that's because you didn't do the other stuff. Whereas others were like, okay, well, let's not get VCs, let's bootstrap ourselves, and then wondered why they couldn't get anywhere. Well, because you don't have the money to fund it. And so I guess the answer to a Hyperliquid style launch, sure, that's the ideal launch that you would want to do. If you can fund it yourself, bootstrap it, get a product market fit for a product for a year, and then drop a token to your community, wonderful, you've won. That would be the dream.
Awesome. Yeah, the story's always more complicated than it seems on the surface, but it does. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, so I guess maybe as we're closing out here, so maybe some of the early guys that are just trying to kind of calibrate to, I think it's a common position for a lot of early teams to be very engineering heavy. And then suddenly you find yourself immediately in a position where, oh, we need to tell people about this. You've been heads down. Maybe you don't have the social following, anything like that. You realize you kind of have to start from scratch. Do you have any advice for the person who just did something technically amazing and now is trying to figure out where on earth to start with telling people about it? Almost.
Yeah. The
cold start.
The cold start. What I would say is all the stuff that's going to come after that, like the branding, the look of the project, the name, the campaigns you run, whatever else, it's all going to stem from one thing, which is your vision for the business and your brand positioning. And a lot of people skip a step, particularly engineering and technical people. So as I said, you build the thing and they're like, cool, now let me tell everyone, and let me just tell everyone what I've built. And it's a bunch of technical jargon and people don't buy it because they don't really understand the story or what have you actually solved. And so what we do with a lot of projects, even established projects, come to us and realize they've missed this step and we need to go back before we go forward, which is, why do you exist? What's the thing you're solving? What's your differentiator in the market? Why should people care? If you can nail that and that story and that message yourself as a founder, as a team, everything else is going to become incredibly easy. Because then your branding sort of is just a personification of that, but visually. Your campaigns that you run are all about selling that story. The partnerships that you build are all to help support this thing. And it's much easier to get people to buy into this vision that you've got because you've got a vision. And then as a founder, you have something to talk about all the time. everything that's happening, you bring it back to this thing that you're talking about. And there's been example. I think Celestia did this phenomenally well with modular. Right, Eigenlayer did this brilliantly with restaking. These were terms that just didn't exist in crypto. They weren't used, right? And they kind of built them out as these are things that you should care about. And they just went really, really hard for a long time on educating people on why this matters. And that because they had a vision, they had a really clear story to tell, and they didn't chop and change and like a Polygon or a Polkadot might do every now and again. And yeah, so I would say figure out your brand positioning and like why you exist and what your story is, and everything else is going to become a lot easier for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Danny, for coming out and talking about this. And thank you everybody for watching, coming in with questions. As always, we'll post these recordings if you want to go back and revisit any of it, or if a member of your team missed it. Other than that, we'll see you at the next talk. And yeah, thank you so much for coming out.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me. Good luck, everyone.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Cheers. Bye.